Hello, I'm Walter Little. Welcome to the Veterans History Project. Today is March 31st, 2016. We're at Metro East in Gresham, Oregon, and today we have with us Chuck Oliver.
Yeah,
Oliver,
glad to meet you. Thank you.
So, where were you born?
I was born in Torrance, California in 1943, right in the middle of the war.
And you were telling me that you were a victim of shore leave?
Yeah, I was. My father was on USS Saratoga, which was an aircraft carrier that had a lot of battle damage, and they sent it to San Francisco to be repaired. And of course, they could never radio or write to anybody about ship's movements, but once it got there, my dad called my mom on the phone, said, "I'm wiring you some money. Get up here right now." And I am the result of their visit together.
So you're shore leave.
Yeah, shore leave. That's right.
So did you grow up then in Torrance? Or?
No, actually, that's where I was born, but I lived in Manhattan Beach and Hermosa Beach until I got out of college, actually.
Is that California?
Yes.
Thank you. And where'd you go to high school then?
I went to Aviation High School, which that's sort of an odd name. It didn't really have anything to do with aviation except that it was on Aviation Boulevard. But it was right down where all the aircraft plants were, especially the ones that built planes during World War II and thereafter. And so that's how the name of the boulevard got named, and the school was named after that.
And you're not an only child, correct?
No, I have a deceased sister, and she's about 7 years, or would be 7 years older than I am today.
So you never went to the same school? She pretty much graduated before you?
No, she was out of there, and actually we had moved from the time she went to high school versus when I went, so I went to a different high school anyway.
And what did you want to be when you were in high school?
Well, you know, when I first started high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to be, so they have counselors that talk to you, and so I just went into college prep so that as I went on, I could decide what I wanted to do, but I really didn't know early on. But I decided after being in school that I wanted to go into electronics. And so I had a friend that also did, and so we started out by going to El Camino Junior College or Community College, which was about 4 or 5 miles from where I lived. And I did that for 2 years, and while I did that, I ended up, when I was 19, joining the U.S. Naval Air Reserve as an enlisted man, and I actually was a weekend warrior for about 3 years while I finished college, and the last 2 years of that, I had decided that I wanted to become an officer. My dad was an officer, and I had an uncle who was a naval aviator, and so I decided I did too. And so they, during the summer, would send me for several months to Newport, Rhode Island, to officer candidate school. And when I completed that, and then finally completed my college, the day that I graduated from college is the day that I got my commission. Actually, it would be the day that my date of rank started, and I got my commission when I first went in to report for duty.
And where was that? That
was at Los Alamitos Naval Air Station, same place I went as a weekend warrior.
And what was your assignment?
At that point, I was going to become an electronic materials officer on a destroyer that was home-based in Long Beach, California. It was a USS Turner Joy and DD-951. And when I first went there, I was assigned to go to school down in San Diego for a couple of months to Electronic Material Officer School and to Combat Information Watch Officer School. so I'd be ready to go when I got to the ship. And actually the guy I was relieving was still there for a while, so he sort of showed me the ropes, and when he left, then I took that duty over.
What does electronics material handler?
Well, they have all the electronic technicians work for them, and you're responsible for all the electronic equipment.
Keeping it all up and running? And
keeping it running, and if it breaks down, if the people on your ship can't fix it, you're sending out reports that you need to go to a shipyard or have somebody from a shipyard come give us a hand to get it fixed.
And what type of ship were you on?
It was a Forrest Sherman class destroyer. There's about 18 of them, and they have a big high hurricane bow on the front. As opposed to, say, World War II destroyers that had a very low bow. And that was to help you go through typhoons and stuff, which I got to do. And I've got a couple of pictures of some green water going over the front of the ship. Maybe you'll see it later on.
Well, you can show those when you want. I'd love to see a picture of that.
Well,
so what
this
is the
might be
purpose
hard.
of the destroyer?
My particular destroyer was built as an anti-submarine warfare ship. So we had torpedo tubes on the side, so we could fire torpedoes at submerged submarines and that sort of thing. And actually, the whole time I was on it, we never did go after submarines. The Vietnam War had started, and actually the ship that I was on about a year before I got to it was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. The USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy were attacked by North Vietnamese PT boats, basically, torpedo boats. And there has been a lot of contention as to whether something like that ever really happened. But the night before that they said that they were attacked, they actually sank some of those PT boats. And I think there were 18 prisoners, North Vietnamese prisoners, that were taken. And we were steaming, or they were steaming at that time, with an aircraft carrier. So aircraft were involved in sinking them as well. But they fired something like 250 rounds at what they thought was there. And then the next night, they had radar contacts, closing range, and there was a couple of people on the ship that said that they saw a torpedo wake go past the ship. It missed the ship. Later on, they sent congressional investigators there, and they talked to the people that were on the ship at that time, which I was not, to see what their story was and what they thought.
And when would this have been?
That was in 1965, I believe, that attack happened.
But that was before you came aboard this ship?
It was, but I talked to a radarman that was up there, and they talked to him, and he swore to me, just personally, just between the two of us, it happened. I saw that torpedo wake, but the congressman said, have you ever seen a torpedo wake before? The guy said, not before that. Then how did you know it was a torpedo wake?
Fish don't swim that fast.
Yeah, that's right. And so the ship was doing a lot of maneuvering so that if there were others fired, that it would miss. But even though the ship was attacked or had PT boats from North Vietnam coming out to attack it the night before, and again, that one resulted in blowing up some of those, and they actually took about 18 North Vietnamese prisoners. So whether it happened or not, I can't really say, but the important part of it is that is what the government used at that time to go to war with North Vietnam.
So, destroyer, besides sinking submarines and stuff like that. What other job does it have? Were you assigned to a task force?
We were part of a task force, and part of it had to do with, they call it plane guarding, where a destroyer will follow a aircraft carrier so that if a plane crashes or something, maybe on landing or somebody falls overboard or whatever, you can zoom over there to try to pick them up. But during the time that I was there, their helicopters always beat us to it. So I never was involved with that.
But you're also a screening vessel for an aircraft carrier. You're supposed to get in the way of torpedoes coming at it and go
Yeah,
after
but
the submarines.
actually, that never happened really. We would be able to go out. Yeah, we had the ability to fire torpedoes at submarines from the ship. They had launch tubes on the sides, and we could do that. But that never happened any of the time that I was on board, for real. We had drills, but not for real.
So did you have any action at all while you were stationed on that ship?
Yeah, I did. There was a evening in 1960, be about 1969 in the summer, or 1968 in the summer, that we were steaming with one other destroyer, and our mission was to interdict waterborne logistics craft, barges or fishing boats or whatever, headed south from North Vietnam to bring ammo and any other supplies to the North Vietnamese down in South Vietnam. And I think one day we sank something like 50 of them. And the way we could tell a fishing boat from a waterborne logistics craft was that if the fishing boat left from North Vietnam, went out, went fishing, and went straight back, he was a fishing boat and we wouldn't touch him. But after he got out there, if he turned south, that was it.
It was a mistake.
We'd blow him out of the water. But we also worked with spotters, and we supported ground troops. On one ground support mission, the first thing they do is they call for HE, or high explosive rounds. And we'd just go in and try to get the troops, North Vietnamese troops, if we could, on the ground with that.
So a destroyer has deck guns.
Oh, it does.
And
it
how
had
big are
3
they?
5-inch 54s. And they could shoot high explosive or white phosphorus or actually flares and stuff
Starburst.
like that, starburst. Yeah.
And so you were called upon to support ground troops then?
Yeah, we did. And after we got the word from the spotter, he said, they're jumping into the craters that your high explosive is made. Now give me 20 rounds of white phosphorus. They didn't like white phosphorus.
Yeah, it burns a little.
Yes, and you can't put it out.
So did your ship ever take damage while you were on it?
It did. And one evening we were steaming with another ship, another destroyer, and a spotter had said that there was about a 75-foot long barge pulled in behind this little point, basically hiding from us. And so they asked us to go in and blow that up. And at that time, I was working in combat. I was on watching the Combat Information Center, and I had all of the intelligence about that there were movable gun emplacements up on some cliffs that were near where that was. And their gun range is exactly the same as our gun range, about 10 miles. So the Commodore, who was the leader of this little group of ships, he wasn't actually a Commodore by rank, he was a naval captain, but he was called the Commodore because he had this little group of ships that he was going to take in there. It was right at dinner time, and he said, you know, I think we're going to go in. He said, I think I'll use my ship. He was on the other ship, not the Turner Joy, to blow that up. And he said, so you just come in with us and sort of stay in formation. It's dinner time, no sense you guys going to general quarters. We'll just go to general quarters. So we started steaming in, and as they came in, they were steaming at about 8 knots, which is about 10 miles an hour, in a perfectly straight line, so they could get their gun solution. In those days, they didn't have electronic computers, but they had big mechanical computers, probably bigger than this table, with 5,000 gears in there to determine what the gun parallax ought to be and everything from where the gun director was. And he started firing, and we kept getting closer, and finally I was looking over the shoulder of the radar operator, and I said, man, we are really getting in close. So I reached over his shoulder and I ran the range strobe out. I said, holy cow, we're down to 6 miles. We're well inside their gun range. But of course they were movable, and we didn't even know if they were there. So the front ship, the lead ship, kept shooting until they blew up the barge, and then they said, okay, and as we turned to leave, that's when they opened up on us. They were just drawing us in.
Get closer and closer.
And I think somebody on that ship lost an arm, and on our ship, there was a close burst outside, and our ship, to make it light, had an aluminum superstructure. And I used to joke that you could just about take a .22 rifle, and shoot it in one side and it'd come out the other, you know. And there was one of the guys back there, and he had a seat pack life preserver on, and some of that shrapnel went right through the ship, right through his seat pack life preserver, and hit him right in the butt. But actually, you know, that's not so bad to get hit there. You get a lot of meat instead of a lot of bone to be broken. And he was transferred off the ship for medical attention, and I never really found out how he fared, but I'm sure he made it.
Well, you make it sound like it just punctured a little hole and you guys weren't in danger from that round, but there's a little more. Oh yeah,
there's a little more to it. Yeah, that was one guy that got hurt. But as we tried to go out, my ship was a steamship. It had 4 boilers. When you're only going 8 knots for a long time, we might only be running on 2 boilers and then blowing off a lot of steam too. But all of a sudden now you need speed immediately, which you really basically need 4 boilers to really get it up. It would do about 32.5 knots at full speed if you had all 4 boilers going. But we just watched the speed slowly come up. We made smoke, so that was to prevent them from seeing us very well. And I'm sure both ships were doing a lot of changing headings and stuff to try to make it harder for them to hit us. But there was a lot of air burst. While I was leaning over this guy's shoulder with the range strobe, he said, we're under fire. And I said, what? And he says, yeah, we're under fire. We just took a hit in the air search radar antenna. And the radar antenna control panel was right on the bulkhead right behind me. And I whipped around. That was all tripped off. And he said, we just took a hit in the bow, and actually that was right beside the bow, maybe 3 or 4 feet away. And the shrapnel from that went out and peppered the front of the ship right up at the bow, right at the water line, and actually punched some holes in the side of the ship. But Navy ships, especially destroyers, have something called a peak tank, which is up in the bow, and that is a tank that can be flooded, water added or taken out of it to help the ship have the proper position as fuel and stuff is used. They can keep it level in the water. So that tank got punctured, but it didn't make any difference because we'd pump water in there anyway. Then the biggest thing that happened was back on the fantail. We took an armor-piercing round that missed our 5-inch 54 gun mount, probably by about 2 feet. Went down through the main deck, blew up the next deck down in the supply office, and the shrapnel from that went through the typewriters and the file cabinets and piping and everything down into the next deck, which was the magazine. And it so happened that that day our magazine was full. And 5-inch 54 naval guns, the projectile and the powder are in 2 separate charges. So the rounds are set in racks by themselves, and then there are powder cans that have the powder in the other can. 5 of the projectiles got hit with shrapnel, but they're sort of inert. You can shoot them out of a gun and they don't usually blow up. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. And after the shrapnel had gone through all of that other stuff, it had slowed down, so the energy wasn't as great. But 5 rounds did get hit. But there's a little catwalk about maybe 36 inches wide, and then on the other side of that is here's all these powder cans stacked. And if one of those pieces of shrapnel had touched a powder can, it would have been like you see on Victory at Sea when the ship just blows up, just goes whoop, and it's gone. So I was that far away from that.
So that lucky shot was almost terminal for you guys then.
Well, it could have been. It could have been very easily. Came really close.
We hit 5 of those rounds.
Yeah.
It was in the magazine.
Yeah, it was in the magazine, but the powder would have been worse than the projectiles blowing up.
Well, the projectiles blowing up would have taken out the powder, wouldn't they?
Oh yeah, or vice versa, yeah. Yeah, we were very lucky that day.
So you weren't injured then in the attack?
No, just the guy that got hit through the seat pack life preserver. But we went out and it was in the evening, so a very short time after we pulled away from the coast, it was dark and we were running with no lights. And I can remember going out onto the main deck and trying to walk aft, and it was so dark you really couldn't see anything, but I was sort of shuffling my feet and I started kicking all this stuff, and what it was shrapnel and stuff from the rounds they were firing at us. And so we collected a lot of that, but that was all sent in to be analyzed to see what kind of ammunition it was and where it was from. It was from China. The Red Chinese provided that ammo.
I would have thought it was Soviet, and they probably did.
Well, they
too.
probably do stuff there too, but in this case it was from China.
Chinese. So you said that one of the privileges of being an officer in the Navy is you get to wear more than one hat.
Oh, that's true. I guess at that time they didn't think it was a real war or something, so they didn't provide wartime complements of crew. We were sailing with peacetime complements.
So a full complement would be what?
You know, at this time I can't remember, but probably another 30 or 40 men. It's been too many years. It's been 45 years ago, and I don't remember exactly what the complements were then. But as far as I was concerned, my job was the electronic material officer, with all of the chief and electronic technicians to help me out, maintaining all the electronic equipment and keeping that going. But I also was the photographic intelligence officer.
And what did that entail?
Well, I had the ship's intelligence camera, and not over in Vietnam, surprisingly, but right off the coast of California. We were steaming north to go from Long Beach up to Seattle, and there was a Russian ship out there. We were probably about 70 miles off the coast, and they had all kinds of antennas and everything, but they were fishing.
A fishing boat. No,
they were
absolutely.
fishing, you know. So we actually took the ship and we steamed in circles around the ship while I took a lot of pictures of all the antennas and everything, and when I got up to Seattle, I turned those in.
Okay, so that's 2 jobs.
That's 2 jobs. I was the electronic warfare officer, and so I had about $1 million tape recorder that could record all the signals from different radar sites, fire control radars, that sort of thing. And $1 million isn't much today, but back then I can remember, wow, $1 million, you know, that was a lot of money to me back then. So we would record fire control radars. And one particular day we were off the coast and we were having a problem with our TACAN, which is a device that's used by aircraft to maintain a range and a bearing to that. And our range was correct, but our bearing was off. So I had my guys working on it, and I happened to be up in combat, and so they'd say, okay, we're gonna shine the electronic signal out there. As soon as we did, all of a sudden, a bunch of cross-slot radars, which was the name they had for North Vietnamese aircraft search radar, I think, came up. And the reason that it came up, we didn't realize it at the time, so when we shut it off to work on it some more, they were on for about another minute or 2, and then they shut off. And so he says, okay, I got to turn it on again. He turned it on. All of a sudden, the cross-slot radars were back up. And I said, you know what? It looks like they think that we're lighting this off in preparation for an aircraft raid, right, that they're going to use us to navigate so they can go over North Vietnam. So I told my guys, just randomly just turn that thing on and off.
Keep them awake all night?
Yes, we'll keep them awake all night. And they did it, they were going just like that following us.
No, fire control, that's not putting out a fire on deck.
No, fire control radar is if you have, say, an airplane and it wants to shoot you down and it has a radar, it can lock onto you with that radar. And that radar is called a fire control radar. So it's and the guns for naval ships can work that way too.
So that's how you aim? That's
how you aim, unless you do it by hand. And there were times that I fired those 5-inch 54s. They used to have a tugboat pull a target sled on about a 2-mile cable, so he could be well out of the way. And we would manually fire the guns using the optics in the gun sight to try to hit that. And that was just as a backup if you were to lose all of your fire control radar and everything, or you had damage to some of the other things that they used to spot with, you could still do it manually to shoot at them.
So that's 3 jobs so far.
Okay. I was a registered publications officer, and that basically had a lot of secret plans to how our radars worked and that sort of thing. But the electronic technicians, as well as radiomen and other people, had to have access to that. So I kept it in a big vault, a big walk-in vault on the ship. And if anybody needed it, I would sign that out and then make sure that I got it back and sign it back in again. Okay. But I was responsible for it, so if anything came up missing, I'd probably been in prison.
But it gets chewed.
Yeah, more than that. I think I'd have been in prison.
Okay, so that's 4 jobs.
Yeah. Some of the other things that you did, I was on watch on the bridge, usually a junior officer of the deck, which meant that I worked with the officer of the deck, which was senior to me. And but you would steer the ship, and if you were going somewhere, you'd make sure you stayed on course. And to keep everybody from getting bored on long transits, like going across the ocean, we used to have a switch there right on the bridge where you could turn off the steering went through several electrical cables back to the aft part of the ship, back to the rudders. And there was a guy on watch in after steering, and he couldn't see out the window or anything, and especially at night. I think he got very sleepy, so we'd turn that off, and then all the alarm bells would go off back there. And then we'd have him steer. We'd tell him what course we wanted him to steer. He had his own compass back there and everything, compass repeater. And he steered the ship from after steering. And we used to play all kinds of games. Usually the bridge against the Combat Information Center. And there were manuals, and you see a red light on the horizon and it flashes 3 times. Quick, what do you do? And so we had books that would tell us all that stuff. But there were all kinds of interesting things that I never experienced in real life on the ship, but we'd go through that just to try to stay sharp and keep everybody up to date on what to do if something like that happened.
I never asked you, what was your rank?
I ended up being a lieutenant. I went aboard as an ensign, and then made lieutenant junior grade, JG, and then a full lieutenant by the time I left.
And how long did you serve on that ship?
About 3 years.
3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were done with that ship, what happened?
I ended up getting a civilian job up in Portland, Oregon. And I took that at Owens, Illinois Glass Company. They hired me as an industrial engineer, and so I worked up there.
And are you married?
I am. I have a wife that I met at Owens, Illinois as a young girl, and probably the first person I talked to when I walked in the door. And we've been married about 43 and a half years now.
And do you have children?
I have 2 children. One of them is in Naples, Florida, and he is he has his own business. He's a consultant. He used to be a land developer, and he is a civil engineer, and he has licensing to build up to 30-story high buildings.
Oh, wow.
And then I have another son who lives down in Rocklin, California, and he is an airline pilot for American Airlines.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, you brought a box with some stuff in it. Did you want to show us?
I did. This right here, I'll hand to you, and so you can get it up. That's a picture of what I used to look like when I was young and was on the ship. Very skinny. Again, I told you that I lost a lot of weight because we used to work like 23 hours a day. I'm sorry, 21 hours a day. And I had about 3 hours of sleep in a given 24-hour period, and sometimes I completely skipped lunch so I could sleep to get 1 more hour in there. Instead of getting 2, I got my whole 3.
So you had 6 days of 23 hours?
6 days like that.
Hours,
yeah, because you were on watch, you had to drive the ship, you had to work in the Combat Information Center, but then during the day you were also the electronics material officer and all of those other hats. So if something came up, you had to be doing that as well.
So you had 6 days of 20 plus hours, and then you had
Sundays,
Sunday.
You only drove the ship. You had a day off from doing your regular jobs.
And so that was your chance to sleep.
Yeah, and then I'd sleep. Yeah.
And how long was your mission then? Were you out the whole 3 years?
No. You go out, I think it was about 9 months, including transit time from leaving Long Beach to get out there. Usually stopped in Hawaii. Usually picked up some supplies and some things there. Refueled. Went from there to Midway, from Midway to Guam, and then from Guam usually to Subic Bay, Philippines, and then from there we would go on out. They were pretty short of materials back then, and so sometimes when we'd leave Long Beach, our gun barrels were worn out, so they called it re-gunning. And when we'd get to the Philippines, they'd put new gun barrels in that weren't worn out, brand new ones. some things, pumps didn't work. So there was a lot of things that had to be taken care of. And a lot of things that as one ship was leaving, they would transfer materials to the ship that was coming in.
So, after getting out, getting a civilian job, why did you decide to leave the military?
At that time, like I said, I was pretty tired. And maybe if it had been peacetime, I might have stayed in, because my uncle stayed in as a naval aviator, and my dad did during the war and prior to the war.
So what else did you bring to show us?
Well, I've got I don't know if you're going to be able to see this.
We should.
But I'm going to show you a picture where that armor-piercing round went through the hull and the main deck, just missing the after gun mount. And there's an enlisted guy that's sitting in that hole. This is the gun mount right here.
You can't see it yet.
Okay.
Now we can.
Okay. This is the gun mount right here. That's the hole in the deck where this gentleman is sitting in the hole, just to sort of give you an idea of what the size was. And that's sort of my prize picture from that incident.
And do you have another picture then?
I have some other pictures. I'm going to show you, let's see, I got to get back to my, oh, come on. This is, I don't know if you'll be able to see this because it's pretty small on there, but that is inside the ship with a guy down there where the round came down into the supply office. So you can see that there's some pipes that were sheared off. You can see the damage to the steel from the deck down in there, and the gentleman there on the side is just there to give you a sense of scale. And I've got one more on here. I don't know if you'll be able to see this one or not. But this is the shrapnel marks from where that round went up and hit the peak tank. The black line down here is actually the water line on the ship. But that's where the holes were, is right up in there and on down, right on down to the level of the water.
So holes that small weren't in danger of sinking the ship?
Not.
They let the water out that balanced it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that really did nothing. So after this happened, even though we had lost our air search radar, we stayed on station and continued our mission for about, I believe, about another 10 days before we were finally relieved. And then we left to go to Subic Bay to go into dry dock. They had to fix those holes. They had to fix the air search radar. And there was actually a thrust bearing back in on one of the screws that had to be repaired as well.
And being part of a task force, losing that antenna wasn't that big a deal, since the other ships would have had some too.
Well, yeah, you'd usually be steaming probably with at least one other ship, and so that would be the case. But normally not as a whole task force. They would assign you to places along the coast to interdict those waterborne logistics craft and to support our troops on shore.
So did that antenna have to wait till you came back to the States to get repaired, or?
No, I think that they replaced that in Subic Bay.
In Subic Bay?
Yeah. And then one other thing that sort of, you have certain memories that just get burned into your mind a little bit. We were stationed off the coast of North Vietnam as a plane guard again, so that once an airplane went in over North Vietnam, it was radio silence for them. We could monitor guard, which was the emergency frequency, and we could hear people talking. But once they went into North Vietnam, they didn't transmit anything. But if they got hit and they could make it to the ocean, we were assigned to be there to rush in and pick them up and get them before the North Vietnamese could get out there and get them. and fired any North Vietnamese that tried it. But normally nothing happened, and so they had us station keep in a rectangle that I think was about 2 miles wide and about 4 miles long. And we could do anything we wanted in there while we were station keeping in that area, as long as we didn't get out of that rectangle. So I used to drive the ship, and I'd back down 1/3 on one screw and go ahead 2/3 on another screw, try to spin the ship around in the length of the ship, and just basically had a chance to see how the ship actually operated. You know, we weren't going somewhere where we had to stay on a course. And a couple of airplanes went in. We listened on guard, never heard anything. I was out on one side of the bridge, and phone talker says, "We got a bogey at 6 o'clock," which would have meant the fantail. And I started turning my head towards the fantail, and just as I got it turned about 45 degrees, 2 phantoms came by, one on each side of the ship below the bridge. The bridge is only 48 feet high.
So they're flying going to water.
And going about the speed of sound, because I didn't hear them till they were right there. And I'll tell you, that just about gave me a heart attack. And then they crossed in front of the bow, and they did victory rolls going straight up till we couldn't see them again. They thought they'd give us a thrill. They did.
They did, didn't they?
Yeah.
That's quite loud,
Yeah.
especially that close.
Yeah.
So was there something else you wanted to show us?
Well,
I believe.
I have right here, this is a plaque that I got from my ship, DD 951, USS Turner Joy, when my term of duty there was finished, and they gave me that as I left the ship, which I've got it hanging on my wall at home, and I sort of treasure that. And then I have 3 cruise books.
And what is a cruise book?
Okay, a cruise book is like you get in high school. You have a yearbook, and so these are very similar to what you would get in high school. And basically, if you open that up, there is a picture of the ship on the first page there, the inside cover. That's what my ship looked like. And then as you go through it, and really it's going to be hard to see those pictures, but it's pictures of all of the people that were on my ship. And a lot of ports that we visited, and there's a map, I think, of all of the places we went on that particular cruise. Just lots of different things that we did. And so every time you go on a cruise, you'd have a different cruise book. Or when I say a cruise, that would be a deployment to Westpac, or the Western Pacific, for gun operations.
What did you enjoy most about being in the Navy? And why didn't you pick the Air Force?
Well, I tell you, my uncle was a naval aviator, and I thought that maybe I wanted to be an aviator. And at the time that I first went to OCS, that was sort of going to be my plan. But by the time I graduated from college, the loss of airplanes was really high. And the Hanoi Hilton, as they say, was full. And I just
didn't want that experience.
I didn't want that experience. So I ended up finally becoming a pilot on my own. I used to have an airplane, but I didn't do it through the Navy.
But your real love was electronics, wasn't it?
I think it was, yeah, and that's why I went to work for the company that I did. And actually, I didn't get to use a whole lot of the electronics from it, but I became an industrial engineer and worked for them for about 30 years, finally ended up as a manager before I retired.
So I kind of interrupted my own question on you, but what did you enjoy most about the military?
I like the camaraderie of it. I tell you, the captain on my ship, Ed Briggs, he was the most squared away guy I think I ever saw. And somebody that I used as a role model really for the rest of my life. I wanted to be just like him. He was a full Navy. He wasn't in the Naval Reserve. He was a USN and had gone to the Naval Academy. And he became a naval aviator. And then later on became the captain of our ship. And just a great guy. I got to go see a lot of places. At the end of my last cruise, after we had that situation with almost being taken out by those rounds, we went to Australia, visited them for a while, went down to Melbourne, to Brisbane, and then went to New Zealand, to Auckland, New Zealand, or as they say, Auckland. So it sounds very much like Oakland, like Oakland, California, only it's Auckland means Auckland. Okay. And some of the funny things that happened there, they always tell you, they sort of give you these little classes about when you're going to go see somebody. You have to be careful what you say, because what you may say could be offensive to them. So we always watched out for that. But when I was in Australia, we met some, I wasn't married then, and some of the junior officers met these girls, and they wanted to know if we wanted to come to a party. I said, sure. So we start introducing ourselves around, and I said, well, my name's Chuck. And they all stopped and they looked at me. And they just stared at me and they, Chuck? And I said, yeah, Chuck. What's the matter with Chuck? Well, that means to throw up. Okay, which I guess it does in our culture too. Yeah, up Chuck, yeah. So one of my shipmates said, oh, call him Charlie. And then they all started laughing. And I said, okay, what's the matter with Charlie? Well, that's our nickname for the village idiot.
You just had it made.
Yeah, so my middle name is Mike. I'm Charles Michael Oliver. So I said, just call me Mike. And after that, everything was fine.
Well, they had a slogan back then, join the Navy and see the world. That sounds like it was true with you.
Yeah, it really was. I'll tell you, one of the most beautiful cruises that we took is after we left New Zealand, we went to Pago Pago in the Solomon Islands, and then steamed directly north to go to Hawaii. And normally when you're crossing the ocean, you're going from east to west. And the stars, depending on what time it is, they're all shifting. But when you're steaming north and the star field is there, every night I could just see the stars just move back a section like that, because they weren't changing by time. They were staying right there so that time of night, those same stars were there, but they were slowly disappearing down to the horizon as we went further and further north. And at that time, the water was really warm, and when I was in California, they had something called a red tide, which at night when the waves would break, these little creatures and stuff would fluoresce. So the waves were all fluorescent, like they were lit up. Well, steaming north from there, that same stuff must have been in the water, and the wake of the ship was just lit up. It was just beautiful.
Now, in the bigger ships, they have little equator ceremonies and stuff.
Did that too.
Did you,
we crossed the equator.
And what happened then?
Yeah, well, when you do that, you want to become a shellback, you know? And so the guys that have crossed the equator before, they get to be your tormentors. And they had it all set up. And
that went for officers as well as
everybody, yeah, you all went through it. They would take a canvas and make a tube out of it, and they would save garbage for about 2 weeks, and they would pack that full in there, and then you guys had to crawl through it.
Swim through it.
Swim through it, yeah. and a few little things like that. But it was interesting, and I have a big certificate at home saying that I crossed, and I'm a shellback now.
And then the next time with the new people, you
then you get to be one of the tormentors.
Which is probably a little more enjoyable.
Probably.
So what would you say the military gave you?
I tell you, I think you go in as a kid or a college graduate that's pretty young, that really doesn't know anything about the world, and you come out the other end and you're a man. You've experienced a lot of stuff that you would never have experienced any other way. And
so it grows you up quickly.
Yeah. And another reason you asked, should I have gone in the Air Force, because I like to fly. But one of the things my dad said, he was on an aircraft carrier, as he said, you know, until you get sunk, you always have great food to eat and you got a warm rack to sleep in. And that was really the case.
Sure.
He went through, during the war, through a typhoon, and his ship made it. And during the time I was on the ship, my ship went through a typhoon.
Now, typhoon kicks up 60, 80-foot waves.
They call them hurricanes on the Atlantic side, and on the Pacific side they're called typhoons. So they're basically the same. So it depends on what class it is. And I can't tell you what class we were in. But I can tell you that on the tables, when you ate, they'd put like a rubber matting down, and then they had this frame that clamped onto the table that made little pockets on there. So you could put your food in there. If you had a glass of something or a cup of something, you use masking tape. You'd tape it to that frame so it wouldn't tip over. And the rubber really held the plate pretty securely. But I have rolled far enough that my food has slipped off my plate before.
And it'd be kind of hard to sleep in that condition.
Yeah, it was. And what I had to do is the mattress in my bunk, I would take books and all kinds of stuff and pack it down both sides so that the mattress would fold up like that, and then I would sleep
in the middle.
In the middle. So as I got thrown to this side or that side, I didn't go very far, and I didn't have to worry about falling out of the rack.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, just one thing, I guess, and that would be that I told you that I would really get tired when you work that many hours. And my cabin was just up by the forward gun mount, Mount 51. And when it was time for you to wake up, they would send a guy down to get you and wake you up, and he'd say, Mr. Oliver, it's time for your watch now, you know. And then all of a sudden I'd hear that gun go off, and not only did the gun go off, which was a big boom, but those gun shells would come flying out and hit that steel deck. And so they'd be clanking around up there. And the concussion from it, we had fluorescent lights in the overhead, and they had C-shaped springs on them because the shock was so great. And I can remember one time that the shock was so great it broke the springs, and the light was hanging on the electrical cord. So I mean, nobody should be able to sleep through that. But I would be so sleepy that when they'd come get me, I'd start to get up, and I'd hear that go off, and I'd say, "Oh no, we got a mission." He says, "Nope, we've been shooting all night," and I could just sleep right through that. I could sleep standing up. At least that's what people told me. If you were in a line and you had to wait for a little bit, you went to sleep because you were so tired.
Well, Chuck, we really appreciate having you on our show.
Well, thank you.
Very
it was sort of fun reliving some of this stuff.
Thanks again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And that's it for us today on the Veterans History Project. Thank you for joining us.